The end of the 7th century saw the expansion of the Muslims across North Africa. By 710 they were in Morocco, and the General Tarif was sent across to explore Europe. The prospecting had finished by April 711, and Tariq ibn Ziyad, a Berber general under the command of the Arabs, crossed the straits throughout the day and the night and brought his troops to Gibraltar. This marked the point of landing and conquest of Europe for the Muslims. It is recalled even through to today in the name Gibraltar, which is derived from Jebel Tariq, the hill of Tariq. For a long time after 711, the rock is relatively ignored. The reason is, of course, there is no threat from North Africa to the Muslims that have conquered Europe. But gradually there is dissent in North Africa and unrest, and some of the tribes of the Sahara become far more fundamentalist and unhappy with what's going on in Europe. And it is from then on that the European Muslims decide to fortify Gibraltar, and they build a tower more or less in this place in the 11th century. This is followed then by subsequent waves of North African Islamic fundamentalist sects that come into Europe, the last one being the Banu Marin, who were the real great constructors of the Tower of Homage and the Castle of Gibraltar. In 1309, the Muslims of Gibraltar lose the rock for the first time ever to Christian forces. The powerful Emir Abu Hassan of the Banu Marin dynasty of North Africa resolves that he's going to recapture Gibraltar and never lose it again for Islam. He comes here and conquers this in 1333. He strengthens this Tower of Homage, makes it more or less what it looks like today. He strengthens the castle all the way down to the galley house where present-day casements is, and builds the wall all the way across and south towards Europa Point, making this a true fortress. At that time, the Banu Marin under Abu Hassan conquered Gibraltar. They hold all this part of the world. To the northeast, the Nasrids are centered in the Alhambra in Granada. To the northwest, the Castilian Christian forces are pushing down in part of the Reconquest. And in the Straits, we have the fleets of Aragon and Genoa, all together fighting what has been known as the Battle of the Straits of Gibraltar. After 1333, the Christian forces, time and time again, tried to recapture Gibraltar. Perhaps the most famous attempt was that of the King Alfonso XI, who actually died outside Gibraltar of Black Death. During these sieges, the Spanish would bring the siege engines all the way up the rock to positions above the present Tower of Homage and would fire down the catapults onto the tower. You can still see the stars of these projectiles on the east face of this Tower of Homage, and you can imagine almost the Muslims hiding in this fortified tower and protecting themselves, something which they did very successfully until the year 1462, when the Spaniards captured the rock and Islam lost it for perpetuity. "30 years after 1462, Granada eventually fell to the Muslim forces. It was in 1492 that Al-Andalus, as the Muslims knew it, ended. But it was a number of years later, in the 1500s, that the last of the Muslims that had remained back in Spain were expelled back to North Africa. The last groups left by ship from Gibraltar. Ironically, the first port of landing in Europe was also their last.